Shipping magnate Gustavo Ferraz had everything, except family. But one fateful night he discovers an abandoned baby on his private beach with a note claiming the child is his. Now he must uncover the truth and face a past he never knew existed. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The midnight waves crashed softly against the shore as Gustavo Ferraz walked along his private beach. At 53, he had everything money could buy: a shipping empire worth billions, a clifftop mansion overlooking the ocean, and more luxury cars than he could drive in a month. But tonight, like most nights, he walked alone. Another day, another deal, he muttered to himself, loosening his tie as the cool sand shifted beneath his bare feet. The board meeting had dragged on for hours. His younger brother, Ricardo, had once again challenged his leadership decisions, suggesting the company needed fresh blood at the helm. The tension between them had been growing for years. Gustavo stopped to look at the moonlit water. His mind drifted to his empty house. No wife, no children. Just wealth and power, and the constant feeling that something was missing. That's when he heard it. A soft whimper carried on the night breeze. Gustavo turned, squinting in the darkness. 20 feet away, partially hidden by the curve of a sand dune, sat a small wicker basket. "What in the world?" he said, approaching cautiously. The whimper came again, clearer this time. Gustavo's heart raced as he knelt beside the basket. Inside, wrapped in a thin blue blanket, was a baby, no more than a few months old. "Dear God," Gustavo whispered, his hands trembling as he reached toward the infant. The baby's eyes opened. At his touch, dark eyes that seemed strangely familiar, something white peeked out from beneath the blanket. A note. With unsteady fingers, Gustavo unfolded the paper and read the hastily scrawled message. "If you found this child, please take care of him. His real father is you." Gustavo staggered backward, nearly falling onto the sand. "This can't be true," he said aloud, though no one was there to hear him. "This is impossible." The baby began to cry, a desperate wail that cut through the night. Without thinking, Gustavo lifted the child into his arms, rocking awkwardly. "Shh, it's okay," he said, surprised at the gentleness in his own voice. "It's okay." As the crying subsided, Gustavo stared at the infant's face. There was something in the shape of the nose, the curve of the chin. "Who is your mother?" he asked softly. "And why would she leave you here?" The baby only blinked in response, tiny fingers reaching up to grab Gustavo's thumb. With the child cradled in one arm, Gustavo searched the basket for any other clues. Nothing, just the blanket, the note, and a small teddy bear. His mind raced through possibilities. There had been women in his life over the years, but no serious relationships. He'd always been too focused on building his empire to consider a family. "Mr. Ferraz," a voice called from up the beach. Gustavo turned to see Elena, his housekeeper, hurrying toward him. At 62, she'd worked for him for over 2 decades and was the closest thing he had to family. "Mr. Ferraz, it's nearly 1 in the morning. I was worried when you didn't—" Elena stopped short, her eyes widening at the sight of the baby. "What on earth?" "I found him," Gustavo said, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Here, on the beach. With this." He handed her the note. Elena's hand flew to her mouth as she read. "Madre de Dios, you think this is true?" "I don't know what to think," Gustavo replied, "but we can't leave him out here." Together they walked back to the mansion, the baby now sleeping peacefully against Gustavo's chest. The grand foyer, with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, seemed suddenly cold and unwelcoming for a child. "We need supplies," Elena said, practical as always. "Formula, diapers, proper clothes." "Call Dr. Mendez," Gustavo ordered, his businessman, instincts kicking in. "Have him come first thing in the morning and find out if any of the staff has baby items we can use tonight." "And tomorrow?" Elena asked, watching as Gustavo carefully sat down, still holding the sleeping infant. "Tomorrow we figure out who this child belongs to," he said firmly, "and if there's any truth to this note." But as the words left his mouth, Gustavo felt a strange twist in his heart. Looking down at the baby's peaceful face, something stirred inside him, a feeling he'd never experienced before. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Gustavo's study as Dr. Mendez packed up his medical bag. "The baby is perfectly healthy," the doctor announced. "I'd estimate about 3 months old, good weight, good reflexes." And Gustavo hesitated. "DNA testing? How quickly can we confirm if he's really my son?" "I've taken samples from both of you," Dr. Mendez replied. "I can rush the results, but it will still take a few days." Elena entered carrying the baby, now dressed in new clothes delivered by one of the maids whose sister had an infant. "He's been fed and changed," she reported, a hint of joy in her voice. "What a good boy he is." Gustavo nodded, distracted by the thoughts swirling in his mind. "Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Doctor." After Dr. Mendez left, Gustavo paced the room while Elena sat with the baby. "We should call the police," he said finally. "Report a child abandonment." Elena looked up sharply. "And then what? They'll take him to social services. That's the proper procedure. And if he is your son..." Gustavo stopped pacing. That's a big if, Elena." "Is it?" she challenged gently. "Look at his eyes, his chin. I've worked for you half my life, Mr. Ferraz. I see you in this child." Gustavo approached carefully, studying the baby's face. The resemblance Elena mentioned wasn't just his imagination. "Even if he is mine," Gustavo said slowly, "what do I know about raising a child? I run shipping companies, not nurseries." "You learn," Elena said simply. "Like all parents." A knock at the door interrupted them. Ricardo Ferraz entered without waiting for permission, as usual. "Brother, we need to discuss the Singapore contract before the call this afternoon," Ricardo began, then stopped abruptly at the sight of the baby. "What is this?" Gustavo hesitated only briefly before deciding on honesty. "I found him on the beach last night, with a note claiming he's my son." Ricardo's expression shifted from surprise to calculation in an instant. "Your son? That's convenient timing, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" "The board meeting yesterday," Ricardo said, circling the room like a shark. "Several members questioned your dedication to the company's future. A legacy heir would certainly strengthen your position." "You think I planted a baby on my own beach?" Gustavo snapped. "That's absurd even for you, Ricardo." "What I think," Ricardo replied coolly, "is that some woman is trying to extort money from you. It's an old trick, brother." "There was no demand for money," Gustavo said. "Just a request to care for the child," Ricardo laughed. "She'll show up, don't worry. Once the story of the billionaire's secret baby hits the press, she'll come with her hand out." "No one is going to the press," Gustavo said firmly. "So what's your plan? Play daddy until the DNA test comes back negative?" Before Gustavo could answer, his cell phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Claudia Vega, his publicity director. "Ferraz," he answered sharply. "Mr. Ferraz, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation developing," Claudia said, her voice tense. "Someone posted a photo online this morning. It shows you carrying a baby into your house last night." Gustavo's blood ran cold. "What?" "It's already being picked up by the gossip sites. Headlines about the bachelor billionaire's secret child. I need your guidance on how to respond." Gustavo looked at Ricardo, whose smirk confirmed he'd already known about this. "No comment for now," Gustavo instructed. "I'll call you back." As he hung up, Elena stood protectively, the baby in her arms. "What is it?" "Someone took a picture last night," Gustavo said grimly. "It's already online." Ricardo shrugged. "Like I said, she'll come forward now. The mother always does when there's publicity." "Get out," Gustavo told his brother, "now." After Ricardo left, Gustavo sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "What will you do?" Elena asked quietly. Gustavo looked at the baby, who was now awake and watching him with those eerily familiar eyes. "First, we need to give him a name," Gustavo said, surprising himself. "We can't just keep calling him the baby." Elena smiled. "You're right. What name were you thinking?" Gustavo thought for a moment. "Miguel," he said finally. "Miguel Ferraz." As if in approval, the baby, Miguel, made a small cooing sound. At Ferraz shipping headquarters later that day, Gustavo sat across from Claudia Vega in his top-floor office. "The story is everywhere," Claudia reported, sliding tablets across the bay. Desk showing various headlines. The mysterious baby has captivated the public. I want this contained, Gustavo insisted. With respect, sir, that's impossible now, but we can control the narrative. How? Issue a statement. Acknowledge finding a child. Express concern for the mother's well-being, and request privacy during this sensitive time. Gustavo nodded reluctantly. Draft something. I'll review it. After Claudia left, Gustavo walked to the window, overlooking the harbor where his ships, massive cargo vessels bearing the Paralyzed logo, were being loaded and unloaded. The empire he'd built from his father's small shipping business now spanned continents. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Paralyzed, there's a woman here insisting on seeing you. She says she's the mother of your child. Gustavo's heart pounded. Send her in. The door opened to reveal a young woman, perhaps 30, with long dark hair and a nervous expression. She was attractive, but not in a flashy way, dressed simply in jeans and a blouse. Mr. Paralyzed, she said, her voice soft but steady. My name is Lucia Santos. I believe you found my son last night. Gustavo gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Sit down, Ms. Santos. As she did, he studied her face for any resemblance to the baby, to Miguel. Why? He asked simply. Why leave a baby on a beach with nothing but a note? Lucia's eyes filled with tears. I was desperate. I've been trying to contact you for months, but your people blocked every attempt. Contact me about what? About your son, she said. About Miguel. How do I know he's mine? Gustavo asked, his voice harder than he intended. We met last year, Lucia explained, at the charity gala for ocean conservation. I was working as a marine biologist with the foundation. We spent one night together. Gustavo's mind raced back. The gala. There had been a woman, intelligent, passionate about her work. They'd shared drinks, conversation, and yes, one night together. But he'd never known her name. His assistant had arranged everything as usual. I tried to tell you about the pregnancy, Lucia continued. I called, I emailed, I came to your office, but I was always turned away. By whom? Your brother, Lucia said. He told me you weren't interested, that you'd pay me to go away and never mention the baby. Gustavo's hands clenched into fists. Ricardo spoke to you? Lucia nodded. He offered money, but I didn't want money. I wanted Miguel to know his father. So you left our son on a beach in the middle of the night, Gustavo demanded, anger rising. He could have been hurt. The tide could have come in. I watched you find him, Lucia admitted. I wouldn't have left if you hadn't come. It was my last desperate attempt to make you see him, to make you care. Gustavo stood, turning to look out at the ocean. The DNA results won't be back for days. I know he's yours, Lucia said quietly. Anyone who sees you together would know. Gustavo turned back to face her. What do you want now, Mrs. Santos? Money after all. Lucia stood, her face flushing with anger. I want my son to have a father who acknowledges him, who cares about him. If that's not something you're capable of, then I'll raise him alone, just as I planned to do when your brother made your feelings clear. As she turned to leave, Gustavo called out, Wait! Lucia paused at the door. Come to the house tonight, he said. Miguel is there. We should talk more. For the first time, Lucia smiled slightly. Miguel. You named him? It seemed wrong not to call him something, Gustavo replied, feeling oddly defensive. It's a good name, Lucia said softly. I like it. After she left, Gustavo sat heavily in his chair, his world spinning on a new axis. If what Lucia said was true, if Ricardo had deliberately kept her away, then his own brother had denied him knowledge of his son. His son. The words still felt strange, foreign. His phone rang. Elena. Mr. Paralyzed, she said when he answered, her voice unusually excited. Miguel just smiled at me. A real smile, not just gas like the books say. I thought you'd want to know. Something warm spread through Gustavo's chest. Thank you, Elena. We'll be having a visitor tonight. Miguel's mother. There was a pause before Elena responded. I'll prepare the guest room just in case. As Gustavo hung up, he looked again at the gossip sites on the tablet Claudia had left. The headlines now screamed about the beach baby mystery and speculated about the mother's identity. By tomorrow, they'd have a name. By tomorrow, everything would change. Gustavo Ferraz, the shipping magnate known for his ruthless business tactics and solitary lifestyle, would be publicly linked to both a child and the child's mother. His carefully controlled world was cracking open. And strangely, as he contemplated the chaos that would surely follow, Gustavo felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. The Ferraz mansion glowed with warm light against the darkening sky as Lucia Santos's taxi approached the security gate. Her heart hammered in her chest, hands fidgeting with the strap of her worn leather purse. "This is it, Miguel," she whispered to herself. "We're finally going to make him listen." The security guard checked her ID against a list and waved her through. As the taxi wound up the long driveway, Lucia gazed at the sprawling estate with its manicured gardens and fountain-adorned circular drive. It was even more imposing than she had imagined. Elena opened the door before Lucia could knock. The older woman's eyes were kind but assessing. "Ms. Santos," Elena said with a nod, "Mr. Ferraz is expecting you. Please come in." Lucia stepped into the grand foyer, feeling immediately out of place among the marble floors and priceless artwork. "Where's Miguel?" she asked, unable to contain herself. "Is he okay?" "He's perfectly fine," Elena assured her. "Mr. Ferraz is with him in the nursery." "Nursery?" Lucia repeated, surprised. Elena smiled slightly. "We've been busy today." She led Lucia up a sweeping staircase and down a hallway to a room that had clearly been transformed in haste. The walls were still the same neutral beige as the rest of the house, but the space now contained a beautiful wooden crib, a changing table, and various baby supplies neatly arranged. And there, standing by the window with Miguel in his arms, was Gustavo Ferraz. "He just fell asleep," Gustavo said quietly, turning to face Lucia. In the gentle lamplight, with the baby cradled against his chest, he looked different than he had in his office, less the powerful businessman and more like an uncertain new father. Lucia moved closer, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of her son. "May I?" Gustavo carefully transferred the sleeping infant to her arms. Lucia pressed her face against Miguel's soft hair, breathing in his scent. "I missed you so much," she whispered, rocking him gently. Elena quietly excused herself, leaving the three of them alone. "She bought everything today," Gustavo said, gesturing to the nursery. "Said the baby deserved proper things." "Elena seems kind," Lucia observed. "She's been with me for 20 years, more family than employee." Gustavo motioned toward a pair of armchairs in the corner. "We should talk." Once seated, with Miguel still sleeping peacefully in her arms, Lucia felt the weight of Gustavo's gaze. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About Ricardo blocking your attempts to contact me." "It's true," Lucia insisted. "I tried for months." "I believe you," Gustavo said, surprising her. "It fits with other discrepancies I've discovered today." "What do you mean?" Gustavo's expression darkened. "After you left my office, I checked the visitor logs. You did come to Ferraz Shipping 3 times. Each time you were turned away without my knowledge. And the emails, the calls. My assistant claims all communications from you were directed to Ricardo on his instructions." Gustavo's jaw tightened. "My brother has much to answer for." Lucia adjusted Miguel in her arms. "I never wanted to cause problems between you and your family." "You haven't," Gustavo said firmly. "Ricardo has done that himself." A silence fell between them, filled only with Miguel's soft breathing. "Why didn't you keep trying?" Gustavo finally asked. "Why leave him on the beach instead?" Lucia looked down. "I lost my job at the foundation. The director said my personal situation was creating unwanted attention. I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. I was staying with a friend, but that couldn't last forever." Her voice broke slightly. "I was running out of options, and Miguel's father was a billionaire who wouldn't even see you," Gustavo finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The beach was my last attempt," Lucia admitted. "I thought if you just saw him, held him once," she trailed off. "It was desperate and foolish, I know that now." Gustavo stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean barely visible in the moonlight. "I've built an empire," he said quietly. "Negotiated billion-dollar contracts, made decisions affecting thousands of employees, but nothing prepared me for finding that basket on the beach." He turned back to face her. "I'm not going to pretend I know how to be a father, Lucia. I never planned for children. My own father was..." He paused. "Less than ideal. Mine died. When I was young," Lucia offered. "My mother raised me alone." Gustavo nodded. "The DNA results won't be back for days, but I see myself in him. In Miguel." "So what happens now?" Lucia asked. Before Gustavo could answer, Elena appeared at the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Vega is here. She says it's urgent." Gustavo frowned. "Tell Claudia I'll be down in a moment." After Elena left, he turned back to Lucia. "My publicity director, the story about Miguel is gaining traction." "I should go," Lucia said, rising with Miguel still in her arms. "No," Gustavo said firmly. "This concerns you too. Come downstairs with me." Claudia Vega paced the elegant living room, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. When Gustavo entered with Lucia and Miguel, her eyes widened. "Mr. Ferraz, I didn't realize..." "This is Lucia Santos," Gustavo introduced. "Miguel's mother." Claudia's professional mask slipped back into place. "Ms. Santos, a pleasure. I'm Claudia Vega, head of public relations for Ferraz Enterprises." Lucia nodded, suddenly aware of her simple clothes and lack of makeup. "What's so urgent, Claudia?" Gustavo asked. Claudia held up her tablet. "Ricardo gave an interview to Global Business today. It just went live." Gustavo took the tablet and read, his expression growing stonier by the second. He handed it to Lucia. The headline screamed, "Ferraz Air Scandal. Brother claims baby story a distraction from company troubles." The article quoted Ricardo extensively, suggesting that Gustavo's sudden discovery of a secret child was a calculated move to distract shareholders from recent business setbacks. He implied that the baby might not be Gustavo's at all, but part of a convenient arrangement. "He's painting me as some kind of gold digger," Lucia said, anger rising, "and suggesting you'd use your own child as a publicity stunt." "Ricardo has always been envious," Gustavo said, his voice deadly calm. "But this crosses a line. We need to respond," Claudia insisted. "Immediately." "With what?" Gustavo demanded. "The DNA results aren't back yet." "With the truth," Lucia said firmly. "Or at least, our truth." Gustavo looked at her questioningly. "Tell them you found Miguel, that you're awaiting DNA confirmation, but are taking responsibility in the meantime, that his mother has come forward, and you're working together for his well-being." "That could work," Claudia agreed, already typing notes on her phone. "Responsible but cautious. It makes Ricardo look reactive and petty." Gustavo nodded slowly. "Draft something. We'll review it together." As Claudia worked, Miguel began to stir in Lucia's arms. "He's probably hungry," Lucia said. "Is there somewhere I can feed him?" Eleanor, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward. "The kitchen would be private. I can show you." After they left, Gustavo turned to Claudia. "What aren't you telling me?" Claudia sighed. "There's already speculation about Ms. Santos. Someone leaked her name to the tabloids an hour ago." "Ricardo," Gustavo growled. "Likely. They're digging into her background, the job loss, her financial situation. They're going to make her look desperate," Gustavo realized. "Frame this as a scheme to trap a wealthy man." "Exactly." Claudia hesitated. "Mr. Ferraz, is there any chance she's lying? That the child isn't yours?" Gustavo's gaze hardened. "Even if I had doubts, I wouldn't discuss them with the press or with you." "Of course not," Claudia backtracked quickly. "I just need to be prepared for every angle." "Prepare for this. Lucia and Miguel will be staying here until further notice. I'm not having them hounded by reporters or manipulated by my brother." Claudia raised an eyebrow but nodded. "That will certainly make a statement." In the kitchen, Eleanor helped Lucia prepare a bottle for Miguel. "How long have you known Mr. Ferraz?" Lucia asked as she tested the formula's temperature. "Since he was younger than you," Elena replied, smiling at Miguel. "I worked for his father first." "What was he like before all this?" Lucia gestured vaguely, indicating the mansion and wealth. Elena considered the question. Driven. Lonely, perhaps, though he'd never admit it. His father was a hard man who pitted the brothers against each other. Ricardo was the charmer, Gustavo the worker. And now? Now Gustavo runs the empire their father built, and Ricardo resents him for it. Elena's eyes were kind but direct. Be careful, Ms. Santos. This family has deep currents. I never wanted to be caught in their drama, Lucia said honestly. I just wanted Miguel to know his father. And now? Lucia looked down at her son, contentedly drinking his bottle. Now I don't know what I want. Back in the living room, Gustavo reviewed the statement Claudia had drafted. This will do, he said finally. Send it out. And for tomorrow? Claudia asked. The board meeting, Gustavo had almost forgotten. Tomorrow's meeting had been scheduled weeks ago to discuss the Singapore expansion. I'll be there, he confirmed. Ricardo will use this against you, Claudia warned. Some board members are already concerned about your focus after the baby news broke. Let me worry about the board, Gustavo said dismissively. You focus on the press. After Claudia left, Gustavo found Lucia in the kitchen with Elena. It's done, he told her. The statement will go out tonight. Lucia nodded, burping Miguel gently. What happens in the morning? I have a board meeting I can't miss, Gustavo explained, but I'd like you both to stay here. It's safer and more comfortable. I don't have any of my things, Lucia pointed out. Elena can help with that, Gustavo assured her. Whatever you need, just ask. Lucia looked uncertain but nodded. Just until things calm down. We won't impose on you long term. Gustavo surprised himself by saying, It's no imposition. The morning brought clear skies and a new level of media attention. Reporters crowded the gates of the Paralyzed estate, their cameras capturing every movement. Gustavo adjusted his tie as Elena brought his coffee. Ms. Santos and Miguel are still sleeping, she reported. The poor girl was exhausted. Have security. Keep the press back, Gustavo instructed. And make sure Lucia has everything she needs. I'll be back after the board meeting. You'll face questions, Elena warned. About the baby, about Ms. Santos. I know. Gustavo's expression was determined. It's time I took control of this situation. The sleek company helicopter landed on the mansion's helipad 30 minutes later, whisking Gustavo to Faraz shipping headquarters in the city. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 members of the board sat around the polished table, with Ricardo at the far end, a smug expression on his face. Gentlemen, ladies, Gustavo greeted them. Shall we begin? Before we discuss the Singapore contract, Ricardo spoke up immediately, I believe we should address the personal situation that's making headlines. Several board members nodded in agreement. My personal life is just that. Personal, Gustavo said firmly. Not when it affects company stock, Ricardo countered, sliding tablets down the table. We're down 3 points since yesterday's news broke. A temporary fluctuation, Gustavo dismissed. Or the beginning of a trend, Ricardo argued. Shareholders don't like uncertainty, brother. An unacknowledged child, a mysterious mother with financial problems. It creates questions about judgment and stability. Gustavo's temper flared, but he kept his voice steady. My judgment regarding this company has earned record profits for 8 consecutive quarters. The Singapore expansion will make it 9. Unless you're distracted by sudden fatherhood, Ricardo pressed. Enough, Martin Wells, the eldest board member, interjected. We're here to discuss business, not Mr. Faraz's private affairs. But they're connected, Ricardo insisted. The timing is suspicious. Just as several board members question my brother's long-term vision for the company, he suddenly discovers a child, a ready-made heir to secure his position. Gustavo slammed his hand on the table. You've gone too far, Ricardo. Have I? Ricardo challenged. Or is it a convenience that this woman appeared right when you needed to strengthen your hold on the company? The board doesn't run on gossip, Gustavo said icily. It runs on results, and my results speak for themselves. Martin Wells nodded. Let's table this discussion and move to the agenda. Ricardo wasn't finished. There's one more thing the board should know, he said. I've spoken with Dr. Mendez this morning. The DNA results are being rushed, but preliminary findings suggest the child may not be a Faraz after all. A murmur went through the room. Gustavo stared at his brother in disbelief. "That's a lie," he said quietly. "Dr. Mendez wouldn't share incomplete results with you." Ricardo shrugged. "Believe what you want. The full results will be available soon enough." The meeting proceeded, but Gustavo's mind was elsewhere. Was Ricardo bluffing, or had he somehow manipulated the test results? As soon as the meeting adjourned, Gustavo called Dr. Mendez. "Did you speak to my brother about the DNA test?" he demanded when the doctor answered. "No, Mr. Faraz." Dr. Mendez sounded confused. "That would be highly unethical. The results aren't even back yet." "That's what I thought," Gustavo said grimly. "Thank you, doctor." His next call was to his security chief. "I want Ricardo's communications monitored," he ordered. "Office, home, cell phone, everything. And I want to know who he's meeting with." It was a step Gustavo had never thought he'd take against his own brother, but Ricardo had forced his hand. Back at the mansion, Lucia walked the grounds with Miguel while Elena prepared lunch. The security team kept the press at the gates, but their cameras had long lenses. "Your daddy lives in a castle," Lucia told Miguel softly. "Not that it matters. We were doing fine without all this." But that wasn't entirely true. She had been struggling, running out of money and options. The foundation job had been her dream, studying marine ecosystems, protecting endangered species. Losing it had been devastating. "Ms. Santos," a security guard approached. "There's someone at the gate asking for you. Says she's your friend." "Carmen Diaz." Lucia brightened. "Yes, she is. Can you let her in?" Minutes later, Carmen rushed toward her, embracing Lucia tightly. "I've been so worried. Your face is all over the news, and then you weren't answering your phone." "It's been crazy," Lucia admitted. "Come inside, I'll explain everything." In the mansion's sunroom, with Miguel napping in a portable crib, Lucia told Carmen the whole story. "So now you're living with the billionaire?" Carmen asked incredulously. "The same man who ignored you for months?" "He says he never knew about Miguel," Lucia explained. "That his brother kept it from him." Carmen looked skeptical. "And you believe him?" "I think I do," Lucia said slowly. "You should see him with Miguel. He's different than I expected." "Different? How?" "Gentler, less sure of himself." Lucia smiled faintly. "He named him Carmen, before I even came forward." Carmen took Lucia's hand. "Just be careful. Men like that are used to getting what they want." "It's temporary," Lucia assured her. "Just until the media frenzy dies down." Carmen glanced around the luxurious room. "And then what? Back to my cramped apartment? Job hunting while caring for a baby?" Lucia hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know," she admitted, "but Miguel deserves to know his father." "And what about what you deserve?" Carmen pressed. Before Lucia could answer, Elena appeared. "Lunch is ready," she announced. "Your friend is welcome to join us." "Thank you," Lucia said, rising to check on Miguel. Carmen hung back, whispering, "This place is unreal." "I know," Lucia agreed. "I feel like I've stepped into another world." "A better one," Carmen suggested. Lucia shook her head. "Different. Not necessarily better." Gustavo's helicopter landed on the helipad as the women were finishing lunch. He strode into the dining room looking harried. "Ms. Diaz," Elena explained, "is Ms. Santos's friend." Gustavo nodded, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Lucia, may I speak with you privately?" In his study, Gustavo paced while Lucia waited anxiously. "Ricardo told the board he has preliminary DNA results, suggesting Miguel." "Isn't mine," he finally said. Lucia gasped. "That's impossible, and the results aren't even back yet." "I know." Dr. Mendez confirmed he hasn't shared any information with Ricardo. Gustavo stopped pacing. "My brother is getting desperate." "Why? Does he hate you so much?" Gustavo sighed heavily. "It's complicated. Our father always favored me, though I never understood why. I worked harder, yes, but Ricardo was more like him. Charming, sociable. When father died, he left me controlling interest in the company. Ricardo never forgave either of us." And now Miguel threatens him further, Lucia realized. A direct heir would solidify my position, Gustavo acknowledged. In Ricardo's mind, that makes both of you a threat. I never wanted to be part of a corporate power struggle, Lucia said, distressed. I just wanted Miguel to know his father. Gustavo came to sit beside her. I know, and I'm sorry you've been pulled into this. Their eyes met, and for a moment Lucia remembered what had drawn her to him at the gala. Not his wealth or power, but the intensity in his gaze, the unexpected vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. The moment was broken by Miguel's cries coming through the baby monitor on the desk. He's awake, Lucia said, standing quickly. I'll come with you, Gustavo offered, surprising her. As they walked to the nursery, Carmen and Elena watched from the hallway, exchanging meaningful glances. Miguel had worked himself into a full cry by the time they reached him. Lucia picked him up, but he continued fussing. May I? Gustavo asked tentatively. Lucia handed Miguel to him, and to her amazement, the baby quieted almost immediately, staring up at Gustavo with curious eyes. He knows who you are, Lucia said softly. Do you think so? Gustavo asked, a rare hint of uncertainty in his voice. Children sense these things, Elena said from the doorway. They know who belongs to them. Gustavo looked down at Miguel, who had grabbed his finger and was holding on tight. I never thought I'd have this, he admitted quietly. A child. A son. Mr. Ferraz, Elena interrupted gently. There's a call you should take. Dr. Mendez's office. Gustavo carefully transferred Miguel back to Lucia. I'll be right back. In his study, Gustavo took the call, his heart racing. Mr. Ferraz, Dr. Mendez said. The DNA results came back early. I thought you'd want to know immediately. And? Gustavo prompted, gripping the phone tightly. The paternity test is positive. Miguel is unquestionably your son. Gustavo closed his eyes, a wave of emotion washing over him. Relief, joy, fear, all mixed together in a storm he hadn't expected. Thank you, doctor, he said, his voice rough. Send the official report to my office. He sat for a long moment processing the news. He had a son, a child of his own blood. The reality of it hit him with unexpected force. When he returned to the nursery, Lucia looked up anxiously. What did Dr. Mendez say? Gustavo's face broke into a rare smile. He's mine, he said simply. Miguel is my son. Tears filled Lucia's eyes. I told you. Without thinking, Gustavo embraced both of them. Miguel nestled between them. It felt right, in a way, nothing in his life ever had. Outside the nursery door, Ricardo watched silently, his face twisted with rage. This changed everything. The child was a Ferraz, after all, a direct threat to his own ambitions. As he slipped away unnoticed, Ricardo made a call. It's me, he said quietly. The DNA test confirmed it. The baby is his. We need to move to plan. B, the voice on the other end responded, and Ricardo smiled coldly. Yes, I understand what's at stake. By this time tomorrow, my brother will have lost everything that matters to him. Everything. Dawn broke over the Ferraz estate, painting the ocean with golden light. In the master bedroom, Gustavo was already awake, reviewing documents on his tablet. He hadn't slept well, his mind filled with thoughts of Miguel and the positive DNA results, his son. The word still felt strange, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Elena entered with his morning coffee. You're up early, she observed, setting down the cup. Lots to think about, Gustavo replied, taking a grateful sip. How are our guests? Elena smiled. Both still sleeping. That little one kept Ms. Santos up half the night. She should have called for help, Gustavo frowned. You or one of the staff could have assisted. She's not used to having help, Mr. Ferraz, or sharing responsibility for Miguel. Elena gave him a knowing look. These things take time. Gustavo nodded, understanding Elena's subtle message. The board meeting yesterday was difficult. Ricardo is determined to cause problems. Your brother has always been jealous, Elena said matter-of-factly, even as a boy. This is different, Gustavo said, his expression darkening. He lied about the DNA test, tried to convince the board that Miguel isn't mine. But the real results are positive. Yes, Miguel is definitely my son. Elena's face broke into a wide smile. That's wonderful news. I need to tell Lucia, Gustavo said, standing, and then we need to discuss next steps. You might want to wait an hour, Elena suggested. Let her rest. Being a new mother isn't easy, especially with all this extra stress. Gustavo checked his watch and nodded. I'll go to the office first, then return for lunch. We can talk then. And Ricardo? Elena asked. Will you confront him about the lie? Gustavo's jaw tightened. Ricardo needs to be dealt with, but carefully. He's still my brother, and he still sits on the board. Just be cautious, Elena warned. He's never taken defeat gracefully. In the guest room, Lucia woke to Miguel's soft cooing. She reached into the portable crib beside her bed and lifted him, smiling despite her exhaustion. Good morning, little one, she whispered, kissing his forehead. Did you know your daddy got the test results yesterday? You're officially a Faraz now, Miguel gurgled in response, his tiny hand gripping her finger. Lucia's mind raced with what this confirmation meant. Gustavo had seemed genuinely happy about the results, embracing them both in a moment of unguarded emotion. But what happened next? Would he want custody? Financial support, but limited involvement? Full co-parenting? A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Carmen peeked in. You're up, I brought coffee. Lucia smiled gratefully at her friend who had stayed overnight in another guest room. You're a lifesaver. Carmen sat on the edge of the bed, handing over the steaming mug. So what's the plan now that the DNA test confirmed what you already knew? I don't know, Lucia admitted. We haven't really discussed it. Well, what do you want? Lucia looked down at Miguel. I want what's best for him. A relationship with his father, security, love. And for yourself, Carmen pressed. I need to find a job, Lucia sighed. Get back on my feet. The marine research position was perfect. It combined my education with my passion. Have you thought about asking Gustavo for help? He probably has connections in the field. Lucia shook her head firmly. I won't use Miguel to advance my career. That would make Ricardo's accusations seem true. It's not using him if Gustavo offers, Carmen pointed out. The man owns half the ships on the ocean. He must know people in marine research. Before Lucia could respond, her phone chimed with an incoming message. She checked it and frowned. What is it? Carmen asked. Dr. Alvarez from the Oceanic Foundation, Lucia said, surprised. My former boss. She wants to meet for coffee today. That's good, right? Maybe they want you back. Maybe, Lucia said uncertainly. After the way they let me go, I'm not sure I want to go back. It can't hurt to hear what she has to say, Carmen suggested. I can watch Miguel if you want to go. Lucia hesitated. I should talk to Gustavo first. After everything with the press, I don't want to just leave the house without telling him. Carmen raised an eyebrow. You don't need his permission, you know. It's not about permission, Lucia insisted. It's about courtesy. We're staying in his home. For now, Carmen reminded her. Don't get too comfortable, Lucia. Men like Gustavo Faraz are used to controlling everything in their world. At Faraz shipping headquarters, Gustavo reviewed the official DNA report with his lawyer, Thomas Bennett. The results are conclusive, Thomas confirmed. Miguel is your biological son. We need to prepare the appropriate legal documents, Gustavo said decisively. I want to establish paternity officially and address custody arrangements. Thomas looked surprised. You're thinking about custody already. Most men in your position would start with child support. Miguel is my son, Gustavo stated firmly. I want to be part of his life, a real part. And Ms. Santos, what are her expectations? We haven't discussed specifics yet, Gustavo admitted, but I believe she wants Miguel to know his father. These situations can get complicated, Thomas warned. Especially with your profile and wealth, we should proceed carefully. Draft the paternity acknowledgement, Gustavo instructed. We'll discuss custody and support once I've talked with Lucia. As Thomas gathered his papers, Gustavo's assistant buzzed through on the intercom. Mr. Faraz, your brother is here to see you. Gustavo exchanged a look with Thomas. Send him in. Ricardo entered moments later, looking perfectly composed in an expensive suit. If he was concerned about his lie regarding the DNA test, he showed no sign of it. Brother, he greeted smoothly. Thomas, The lawyer nodded coolly and excused himself, leaving the brothers alone. "To what do I owe this visit?" Gustavo asked, not bothering to hide his displeasure. Ricardo smiled, taking a seat across from the desk. "I came to apologize. For lying to the board about the DNA results?" "A misunderstanding," Ricardo said dismissively. "My source was incorrect." "Your source?" Gustavo scoffed. "You had no source. Dr. Mendez confirmed he spoke to no one." Ricardo shrugged. "Water under the bridge. The truth is out now. Miguel is a Ferraz. Congratulations." Gustavo studied his brother, suspicious of this sudden acceptance. "What do you really want, Ricardo?" "Peace in the family," Ricardo said, spreading his hands. "We've always had our differences, but we're still brothers. And now I'm an uncle." "You've spent months keeping Miguel's mother away from me," Gustavo said coldly, "and yesterday you tried to discredit both of them to the board. Now you want peace?" "People change," Ricardo said simply. "Finding out I have a nephew. It puts things in perspective." Gustavo didn't believe him for a second. "If you want to prove your sincerity, start by explaining exactly how you intercepted Lucia's attempts to contact me." Ricardo's smile faltered. "Slightly. Ancient history. Let's focus on the future instead. I'm hosting a dinner at my house tonight. The key board members will be there. Bring Lucia and Miguel. Show everyone we're a united family." "Tonight?" Gustavo frowned. "That's very sudden." "The perfect opportunity to introduce Miguel to the Ferraz family properly," Ricardo insisted. "Everyone's curious about him, and his mother." Gustavo's instincts told him to refuse, but he reconsidered. This public display of family unity would effectively neutralize Ricardo's previous attempts to discredit Miguel. "I'll discuss it with Lucia," he said finally. "No promises." Ricardo stood to leave. 8 o'clock. Nothing formal, just family dinner. After his brother left, Gustavo sat, back troubled. Ricardo's behavior made no sense. Why the sudden change? What was he planning? He called his security chief. "I want you to check Ricardo's recent calls and meetings. Something's not right." Back at the mansion, Lucia had dressed and taken Miguel down to the terrace for some morning. "Son?" Elena had provided a comfortable baby lounger, and Miguel was happily kicking his legs in the gentle breeze. "Ms. Santos," a maid approached. "There's a call for you, Dr. Alvarez." Lucia took the house phone, surprised that her former boss would call her here. "Helena, hello," she greeted cautiously. "Lucia, I'm glad I reached you," Dr. Alvarez said warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, it's fine. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize for how things ended at the foundation," Helena said. "It was handled poorly. The board was concerned about publicity, but I should have stood up for you more." Lucia was taken aback by this unexpected apology. "Thank you for saying that. I'd like to meet in person," Helena continued, "to discuss a possible position with our new deep-sea conservation initiative. Your expertise would be valuable." "A new position," Lucia repeated, hope rising despite her caution. "I'd be very interested." "Wonderful. Could you meet me today?" "Say, noon at the Coastal Cafe downtown." Lucia hesitated, thinking of Miguel. "I'm not sure I can get away." "Just an hour," Helena pressed. "I understand your situation is complicated, but this opportunity won't wait." "The funding committee meets tomorrow." Lucia made a decision. "Okay, noon it is." After hanging up, she immediately felt guilty. Should she have consulted with Gustavo first? But why should she? This was her career, her life. Miguel was their shared responsibility, but she was still independent. Carmen joined her on the terrace. "Good news." "Maybe," Lucia said, explaining about the meeting. "Will you really watch Miguel for me?" "Of course," Carmen assured her. "Elena will help too, I'm sure." As if summoned by her name, Elena appeared with a tray of breakfast. "Good morning. Mr. Ferraz called to say he'll be home for lunch." "I might not be here," Lucia said, explaining about the meeting with Dr. Alvarez. Elena nodded. "I'll let him know, and don't worry about Miguel. Between Ms. Diaz and myself, he'll be well cared for." Lucia relaxed a little. "Thank you. This meeting could be important for our future." "Your future is important to Mr. Ferraz too," Elena said carefully. He was quite pleased with the DNA results. I know, Lucia smiled. He seemed genuinely happy. Elena studied her thoughtfully. May I speak frankly, Ms. Santos? Of course. I've known Gustavo Ferraz since he was a young man. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you and Miguel. Lucia blushed. We've barely spent any time together. He's just excited about having a son. Perhaps, Elena said with a knowing smile. But there was a connection between you once, strong enough to create a child. One night, Lucia said dismissively, a charity gala, too much champagne. And yet you spent months trying to tell him about the baby, Elena pointed out. You could have simply asked for money. Many would have. I wanted Miguel to know his father, Lucia insisted. It wasn't about money. Exactly, Elena nodded. And that says something about your character, something Mr. Ferraz has noticed. Before Lucia could respond, Miguel began to fuss. The conversation shifted to baby care, but Elena's words lingered in Lucia's mind. Gustavo arrived home shortly before noon, hoping to catch Lucia before lunch. Instead, he found Carmen holding Miguel in the living room. Ms. Diaz, he greeted her. Where's Lucia? She had an important meeting, Carmen explained, with her former boss from the Oceanic Foundation. Gustavo frowned. She left the estate, with all the press outside. Security helped her leave through the service gate, Elena said, entering with a bottle for Miguel. Dr. Alvarez called personally to offer a potential position. I see, Gustavo said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. When will she return? She should be back within the hour, Carmen assured him, passing Miguel to Elena. It was a last-minute opportunity. She didn't want to bother you at work. Gustavo nodded, though he wished Lucia had called him. There's something I wanted to discuss with both of you. My brother has invited us to dinner tonight, a family gathering with some board members. Carmen raised an eyebrow. The same brother who tried to prove Miguel wasn't yours. The very same, Gustavo confirmed grimly. He claims to have had a change of heart. And you believe him? Carmen asked skeptically. Not for a moment, Gustavo admitted. But attending might be strategically valuable. Elena handed Miguel to him, and the baby settled comfortably in his arms. You're getting good at that, she observed. Gustavo smiled down at his son. It feels more natural than I expected. Mr. Ferraz, his security chief called from the doorway, may I speak with you privately? Gustavo carefully returned Miguel to Elena and followed the security chief to his study. What did you find? He asked. Your brother has been meeting with someone interesting, the security chief reported. Oliver Reyes. Gustavo's expression darkened. The tabloid publisher? The same. They've met 3 times in the past week, most recently last night. So Ricardo's been the source of the leaks to the press, Gustavo concluded. Not surprising. There's more, the security chief continued. Ricardo also met with Dr. Helena Alvarez yesterday. Alvarez, Gustavo repeated, alarm rising. From the Oceanic Foundation? The same woman Lucia is meeting right now. Yes, sir, they met at Ricardo's club for about an hour. Gustavo reached for his phone immediately. Get the car ready, now. The Coastal Cafe sat on the waterfront, its patio offering views of the harbor. Lucia arrived a few minutes early, nervous but excited about the possibility of returning to her field. She took a seat at an outdoor table, ordered a tea, and waited. At precisely noon, Helena Alvarez arrived. In her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and elegant attire, she had always commanded respect in the scientific community. Lucia, dear, she greeted warmly. Thank you for coming. They exchanged pleasantries as they ordered, Helena inquiring about Miguel. He's wonderful, Lucia said, unable to contain her smile. Growing so fast? And his father? Helena asked carefully. The news has been quite dramatic. Gustavo has been surprising, Lucia admitted. In a good way. He's embracing fatherhood more than I expected. Helena nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad to hear it. Now about this position. She explained the new deep-sea research initiative, a 3-year project studying vulnerable ecosystems. The role would be perfect for Lucia's expertise and would require extensive time at sea. 3 to 6 months at a time on the research vessel, Helena explained. working in the field just as you've always wanted. Lucia's excitement dimmed slightly. That's a long time to be away from Miguel. I understand the timing is complicated, Helena acknowledged, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the kind of position scientists wait years for. When would it start? That's the difficult part, Helena said apologetically. The first expedition leaves next week. You'd need to be in Sydney by Monday. Australia? Lucia gasped. That's on the other side of the world? The Foundation would cover all relocation expenses, of course, Helena assured her, and the salary is double your previous position. Lucia's mind raced. A week was no time at all to arrange everything, especially with the complicated new situation with Gustavo and Miguel. I'd need to discuss this with Gustavo, she said slowly. We haven't even established custody arrangements yet. Helena reached across the table to squeeze her hand. I understand, but consider this, Lucia. A wealthy man like Gustavo Ferraz can provide everything for Miguel, the best schools, the best opportunities. What can you offer that he can't? Aume. His mother, Lucia said, stung by the question. Of course, Helena backtracked. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I'm simply suggesting that taking this position might be best for everyone. Miguel would have his father's full attention and resources, and you would have your career back. When you return from expeditions, you can spend quality time together. Something about Helena's argument felt wrong to Lucia. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but beneath. Did Gustavo put you up to this? She asked suddenly. Helena looked startled. What? No, of course not. Then who did? Lucia pressed. Because this feels like an attempt to get me out of the picture. Helena's expression shifted, becoming less friendly. You're being paranoid, Lucia. This is a legitimate offer. Is it? Lucia stood up. Or is it a convenient way to separate me from my son and the story that's embarrassing the Ferraz family? Sit down, Helena said sharply. You're making a scene. Who contacted you, Helena? Was it Ricardo? Helena's silence was answer enough. I thought so, Lucia said, gathering her purse. Tell Ricardo that neither Miguel nor I are going anywhere. She turned to leave. She nearly collided with Gustavo, who was approaching their table with a thunderous expression. Gustavo, she exclaimed, surprised. What are you doing here? Looking for you, he said, his eyes fixed on Helena. Dr. Alvarez, I believe you've also met my brother recently. Helena stood, maintaining her composure. Mr. Ferraz, this is a private meeting. Not anymore, Gustavo said coldly. Ricardo's involvement makes it my business. I was just leaving anyway, Lucia said, still shaken by the realization she'd been manipulated. The job offer came with some interesting strings attached. Let me guess, Gustavo said. Something far away, starting immediately? Lucia nodded. Australia, next week. How predictable, Gustavo said with disgust. My brother's never been particularly creative. This is a legitimate scientific position, Helena insisted. Lucia is qualified. Save it, Gustavo interrupted. I know my brother paid you to make this offer. Probably promised a sizable donation to your foundation, too. Helena's face flushed. The foundation needs funding. Your family has the resources. So you agreed to help separate a mother from her child? Lucia asked, her voice trembling with anger. How could you, Helena? You were my mentor. It wasn't like that, Helena protested weakly. Ricardo said it would benefit everyone. You'd have your career back and Miguel would have stability. With his father but not his mother, Lucia pointed out bitterly. Some benefit. Gustavo placed a protective hand on Lucia's back. We're leaving. Dr. Alvarez, I suggest you tell my brother his plan failed and that I'll be reviewing all Ferraz donations to the Oceanic Foundation immediately. As they walked away, photographers who had somehow gotten wind of the meeting began snapping pictures from across the street. They're everywhere, Lucia said, dismayed. My car's around the corner. Gustavo guided her, shielding her from the cameras. I'm sorry about all this. Once safely inside the luxury sedan, Lucia let out a shaky breath. How did you know? My security. Team discovered Ricardo met with Dr. Alvarez yesterday, Gustavo explained. After his sudden change of heart this morning, I was suspicious. He asked about me? About us? He invited us to a family dinner tonight, Gustavo said grimly. Another trap, no doubt. Lucia leaned back against the leather seat, overwhelmed. Why is he doing this? What does he gain by sending me away? Control, Gustavo said simply. With you gone, he'd use Miguel to manipulate me, play on my inexperience as a father, my desire to do right by my son. And the press would love the story of you raising him alone, Lucia realized. The devoted father stepping up after the mother abandoned her child. Exactly. They rode in silence for a moment, both processing Ricardo's scheme. Thank you, Lucia said finally, for coming to find me. Gustavo took her hand, surprising both of them. I wasn't going to let them separate our family. Our family. The words hung between them, filled with meaning neither was ready to fully explore. What, now? Lucia asked as they approached the mansion gates. Now we prepare, Gustavo said decisively. Ricardo won't stop. We need to protect Miguel and each other. Back at the mansion, Carmen and Elena listened in shock as Lucia and Gustavo recounted what had happened. That's diabolical, Carmen exclaimed, bouncing Miguel gently in her arms. Using your career dreams against you. Ricardo has always been manipulative, Elena said sadly, but this crosses a line. What will you do about the dinner invitation? Carmen asked. Gustavo and Lucia exchanged looks. I think we should go, Gustavo said, surprising everyone. But on our terms. You want to walk into his trap knowingly? Lucia asked incredulously. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, Gustavo explained. Ricardo expects us either to decline or to come unprepared. Either way he wins, but if we go fully aware of his intentions, we can turn the tables, Lucia finished, understanding dawning. Exactly. You'll need to be careful, Elena warned. Ricardo is cunning, and we'll need a plan, Lucia added. A good one. Gustavo smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. I think between the two of us we can outwit my brother. For the first time since finding Miguel on the beach, Gustavo felt truly confident. Not just about facing Ricardo, but about everything. Something had shifted when he saw Lucia standing up to Dr. Alvarez, refusing to be manipulated, even at the cost of her dream job. She was stronger than he'd realized, and together, they might be unbeatable. As evening approached, Lucia stood in front of the guest room mirror, assessing her appearance. Carmen had helped her style her hair and Elena had loaned her a simple but elegant black dress. You look beautiful, Carmen assured her, adjusting Miguel's tiny bow tie. They won't know what hit them. I'm nervous, Lucia admitted. These people aren't just Gustavo's family, they're powerful business executives. So what? Carmen shrugged. You're Miguel's mother. That gives you power too. A knock at the door announced Gustavo, dressed impeccably in a dark suit. He stopped short at the sight of Lucia, genuine admiration in his eyes. You look... He paused, searching for the right word. Perfect. Lucia blushed, suddenly shy. Thank you. Elena helped. And this young man, Gustavo smiled at Miguel, in his miniature formal outfit. The most handsome Ferraz yet. Carmen handed Miguel to Lucia. I'll wait up. Call me if anything goes wrong. I've instructed security to be on alert, Gustavo added, and the car will stay at Ricardo's house, ready to leave at a moment's notice. The drive to Ricardo's waterfront penthouse was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. Miguel slept peacefully in his car seat. Remember, Gustavo said as they pulled up to the building, no matter what happens, we present a united front. Ricardo will try to divide us. Lucia nodded, taking a deep breath. United front. Got it. Ricardo's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. A private elevator whisked them up, opening directly into an impressive foyer. Ricardo himself greeted them, all smiles and charm. Brother Lucia and little Miguel, welcome. He kissed Lucia's cheek as if they were old friends, not acknowledging the cafe incident at all. Thank you for inviting us, Lucia said politely, though her eyes remained wary. The penthouse was filled with people, board members from Ferraz Shipping and their spouses, all curious about the baby who had made headlines. Everyone, Ricardo announced loudly. My brother Gustavo, his son Miguel, and Miguel's mother, Lucia Santos. The guests gathered around, admiring Miguel and asking questions that danced on the edge of rudeness. "Such a surprise to learn about the baby this way," one board member's wife commented. "How exciting for you, Gustavo." "The most wonderful surprise of my life," Gustavo replied smoothly, placing his arm around Lucia's waist. "Finding both Miguel and Lucia has changed everything." Lucia smiled up at him, playing her part perfectly. "We're still adjusting, of course, it's all happened so quickly." "The DNA results confirmed paternity?" another board member asked bluntly. "Without question," Gustavo answered. "Miguel is my son." Ricardo circulated with drinks, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Dinner will be served shortly, please make yourselves comfortable." As the evening progressed, Lucia found herself separated from Gustavo, cornered by two board members' wives who asked increasingly personal questions. "And where exactly did you and Gustavo meet?" one asked, her smile sharp as a knife. "At the Oceanic Conservation Gala last year," Lucia answered truthfully. "I was working with the foundation." "As what exactly?" the other woman pressed. "A server." Lucia kept her composure. "As a marine biologist, I hold a doctorate in oceanic ecosystems." The women exchanged surprised glances. "How unexpected," the first one managed. Across the room, Gustavo was engaged in a tense conversation with Martin Wells, the senior board member. "Ricardo has concerns about your focus," Martin was saying, "with this sudden family situation." "My focus has never been sharper," Gustavo assured him. "Having a son clarifies one's priorities. The company's long-term stability is more important to me now than ever." Meanwhile, Ricardo had managed to isolate Lucia in the kitchen while she was warming Miguel's bottle. "He's truly beautiful," Ricardo said, nodding toward the baby in her arms. "He has the Ferraz eyes." "Thank you," Lucia said cautiously. "You know," Ricardo continued casually, "I feel terrible about our misunderstandings. I only want what's best for my nephew." "And what do you think that is?" Lucia asked. "Stability. Family unity." Ricardo smiled thinly. "I hope you've reconsidered Dr. Alvarez's offer. It really would be perfect for your career." "And convenient for you," Lucia added. "With me on the other side of the world." Ricardo's expression hardened. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I? You tried to keep me away from Gustavo for months. When that failed, you attempted to discredit Miguel. Now you're trying to ship me off to Australia. What's next, Ricardo?" Before he could answer, Gustavo appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right here?" "Just getting to know each other better," Ricardo said smoothly. "Family bonding." "Dinner's being served," Gustavo said, not taking his eyes off his brother. "Shall we?" Throughout the elaborate meal, Ricardo maintained his charm, toasting his brother and the newest Ferraz. But Lucia noticed how he carefully directed the conversation, highlighting the challenges of Gustavo's new situation. "My brother will need to balance significant responsibilities now," Ricardo commented. "Running the company, raising a son, quite the adjustment for a confirmed bachelor." "Life is full of adjustments," Gustavo replied evenly. "Fortunately, I have excellent support." He smiled at Lucia. As dessert was served, Ricardo tapped his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose something special to celebrate my nephew's official entry into the Ferraz family." All eyes turned to him. "The company yacht is prepared for a weekend cruise. I suggest we all sail tomorrow, a chance for the board to get to know Lucia and Miguel in a relaxed setting." Ricardo smiled broadly. "What do you say, brother? A family voyage?" Gustavo hesitated, caught off guard. This wasn't the trap he'd expected. "It's short notice," he began cautiously. "Everything's arranged," Ricardo insisted. "The staff is already on board, preparing. Just say yes." The board members murmured their approval of the idea. Lucia touched Gustavo's arm lightly, giving a subtle nod. "We'd be delighted," Gustavo finally agreed, watching his brother carefully. "It sounds perfect." Ricardo looked triumphant. "Excellent. We'll depart at noon." As they prepared to leave at the end of the evening, Ricardo pulled Gustavo aside. "Last time, I'm glad you're being reasonable, brother. he said quietly. "This weekend will resolve everything." "What does that mean?" Gustavo demanded. Ricardo just smiled. "You'll see, family first, right?" In the car on the way home, Lucia cradled a sleeping Miguel. "He's planning something for this cruise, isn't he?" "Without question," Gustavo confirmed grimly. "But what?" "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," Lucia said with determination. "He's not getting near our son." Gustavo reached over to take her hand. "No, he's not." What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Ricardo was meeting with Oliver Reyes, the tabloid publisher, in the private room of an exclusive club. "Everything's set," Ricardo was saying. "Once we're at sea, there will be no escape." Oliver looked concerned. "This is going beyond a few strategic leaks, Ricardo. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Ricardo cut him off. "By the time we return to shore, my brother's precious new family will be destroyed, and I'll be there to pick up the pieces of both Gustavo and the company." "What about the child?" Oliver asked. "Your own nephew?" Ricardo's eyes were cold. "Collateral damage. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good." He raised his glass in a mocking toast. "To family." Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Paralyzed mansion as preparations for the yacht cruise were underway. In the nursery, Lucia packed Miguel's things while Carmen watched with concern. "I still think this is a bad idea," Carmen said, folding tiny outfits into a bag. "Going on a boat with a man who's tried 3 different ways to separate you from your son. We'll be surrounded by board members and their wives," Lucia reasoned. "What could Ricardo possibly do in front of all those witnesses?" "I don't know," Carmen admitted, "but that's what worries me. He's planned something, Lucia. Something you and Gustavo haven't anticipated." Lucia paused, looking down at Miguel sleeping peacefully in his crib. "Maybe, but running away would only make things worse. Ricardo would use it against us, make it seem like I have something to hide." Carmen sighed. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Keep your phone charged and call me if anything seems off." "I promise," Lucia assured her. "And Gustavo will be with us the whole time. He won't let anything happen to Miguel." Downstairs, Gustavo was on the phone with his security chief, speaking in hushed tones. "I want a complete background check on everyone who'll be on that yacht," he instructed. "Staff, guests, everyone. And I want our own security person on board, someone Ricardo doesn't know." "Already arranged, sir," the security chief replied. "Maria Vasquez will be posing as a server. She's ex-military, fully trained." "Good. And the tracking devices? In place on your watch and Ms. Santos's phone as requested. If anything happens, we'll know exactly where you are." Gustavo ended the call as Elena approached with coffee. "Everything is prepared," she reported, "though I still wish you would reconsider. We have to face Ricardo eventually," Gustavo said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Better on our terms than his. Just remember," Elena cautioned, "your brother has always been willing to go further than you expect. Be vigilant." Gustavo nodded, his expression grim. "I know. That's why I've taken precautions." As Elena turned to leave, Gustavo added, "If anything happens, anything at all, contact Thomas Bennett immediately. All the necessary documents are in my safe." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded in understanding. At that moment, Lucia entered with Miguel, now awake and dressed in a tiny sailor outfit that made Gustavo smile despite his concerns. "Ready for his first voyage," Lucia said, trying to keep her tone light. Gustavo crossed the room to join them, his hand gently touching Miguel's dark hair. "He looks perfect." Their eyes met over their son's head, a silent communication of shared worry and determination passing between them. "Whatever happens," Gustavo said quietly, "we stay together, all 3 of us." Lucia nodded. Together. The Ferraz family yacht, Estrella del Mar, was a gleaming 150-foot vessel moored at the private marina. As Gustavo's car pulled up, they could see the other guests already boarding, champagne glasses in hand. Ricardo stood at the gangway playing the perfect host. "There they are," he called out cheerfully. "Our guests of honor." Camera flashes erupted from nearby boats. The press had somehow gotten wind of the excursion. "Smile," Gustavo muttered to Lucia. "It's all part of the show. With Miguel secure in Lucia's arms, they made their way up the gangway, greeted by applause from the board members and their spouses. "Welcome aboard," Ricardo said, kissing Lucia's cheek and clapping his brother on the shoulder. "We have a perfect day for sailing." The yacht was the epitome of luxury, with polished wood decks, chrome fixtures gleaming in the sunlight, and staff in crisp white uniforms attending to every need. "Let me show you to your suite," Ricardo offered. "I've had the master cabin prepared for the three of you." He led them below deck to an opulent stateroom with panoramic windows, a king-sized bed and a custom crib for Miguel. "You've thought of everything," Lucia remarked, her tone carefully neutral. "Only the best for my nephew," Ricardo smiled. "We'll be setting sail shortly. Join us on the upper deck when you're settled." After he left, Gustavo immediately began checking the room, looking under furniture and behind artwork. "What are you doing?" Lucia asked, laying Miguel in the crib. "Looking for cameras or listening devices," Gustavo explained. "I wouldn't put it past Ricardo to spy on us." "You really think he'd go that far?" Without question, Gustavo finished his inspection, seemingly satisfied. "I think we're clear, but we should still be careful what we say in here," they rejoined. The party on the upper deck as the yacht pulled away from the marina, the coastline slowly receding behind them. Martin Wells approached, champagne in hand. "Quite the gesture from Ricardo, isn't it? A family reconciliation cruise." "My brother is full of surprises," Gustavo replied diplomatically. "As are you," Martin chuckled. "A secret son." The board was quite taken aback. "Life is unpredictable," Gustavo said simply. "Indeed." Martin lowered his voice. "Just between us, Gustavo, this situation has raised some concerns about succession planning. With a direct heir now in the picture, Miguel is 3 months old, Martin," Gustavo pointed out. "Succession planning seems a bit premature." "Perhaps," Martin conceded. "But these things should be considered. Ricardo has been very vocal about his readiness to take on more responsibility." Before Gustavo could respond, Ricardo called for everyone's attention. "A toast," he declared, raising his glass, "to family, old and new, and to the future of Paralyzed shipping, secure in the hands of the next generation." Everyone drank, though Gustavo merely touched the glass to his lips, watching his brother carefully. The yacht cruised along the coast for several hours, the atmosphere seemingly relaxed and festive. Lucia circulated among the guests, Miguel in her arms, winning them over with her intelligence and obvious devotion to her son. By late afternoon, they had anchored in a secluded bay, the water a brilliant turquoise against the white sand beach. "Perfect. Spot for an evening barbecue," Ricardo announced, "and perhaps some swimming before dinner." Most guests changed into swimwear, including Lucia, who wore a modest one-piece under a light cover-up. She sat under a large umbrella with Miguel, while others splashed in the water off the yacht's swimming platform. Gustavo, still in slacks and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sat beside them. "Having fun?" he asked, his tone light for the benefit of nearby guests. "Trying to," Lucia replied with a small smile. "Everyone's been surprisingly welcoming." "You've charmed them," Gustavo said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. Ricardo approached, dripping from his swim, a towel around his neck. "Brother, you're not joining us in the water. The temperature is perfect." "Perhaps later," Gustavo demurred. "And Lucia?" Ricardo turned to her. "Surely you'd enjoy a quick swim." "I can. Watch little Miguel for a few minutes." "That's very kind," Lucia said carefully, "but he'll need feeding soon." Ricardo's smile never faltered, but something flashed in his eyes. "Of course. Another time then." As he walked away, Gustavo leaned closer to Lucia. "Don't let Miguel out of your sight, not for a second." "I wasn't planning to," she assured him, "but he seems to be behaving himself so far." "That's what worries me," Gustavo murmured. "Where's the trap? What's he waiting for?" As the sun began to set, the guests returned to their cabins to change for dinner. In their stateroom, Lucia bathed Miguel while Gustavo showered and changed. "He's been so good today," Lucia remarked, dressing Miguel in fresh clothes. "Not a single tantrum, even with all these strangers around." "He's a Faraz," Gustavo said with unexpected pride. Born to handle social obligations, Lucia laughed, a genuine sound that made Gustavo realize how rare it had been to hear her truly happy. "What?" she asked, noticing his expression. "Nothing," he said. "It's just nice to hear you laugh." Their eyes met, and for a moment the connection between them felt like more than just their shared concern for Miguel. There was something else, something that had been there at the charity gala a year ago, a spark neither had forgotten. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. "Dinner in 30 minutes, a staff member called through the door. "We should—" "Go up," Lucia said, looking away first. "Keep up appearances." Gustavo nodded, helping her gather Miguel's things. As they prepared to leave, he impulsively reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever happens," he reminded her, "we stay together." Dinner was an elaborate affair set up on the main deck under the stars. Lanterns glowed softly, and a string quartet played quiet music as the guests enjoyed a gourmet meal. Ricardo had arranged the seating strategically, placing Gustavo at one end of the table and Lucia at the other, with Miguel in a high chair beside her. Divide and conquer, Gustavo thought grimly, making polite conversation with the board members' wives seated near him while keeping Lucia in his line of sight. Halfway through the meal, he noticed Ricardo leaning close to Lucia, speaking intently. She looked uncomfortable, shaking her head slightly. Gustavo was about to stand when his phone vibrated with a text from Maria, the undercover security officer. "Stay calm. I'm nearby, watching them." He forced himself to remain seated, though every instinct told him to go to Lucia's side. After dessert was served, Ricardo stood for another toast. "If I could have everyone's attention," he called out, his voice carrying across the deck. "I'd like to make an announcement." The guests fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "As you know, my brother recently discovered he has a son," Ricardo began, smiling broadly. "A wonderful surprise for our family." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. "What you may not know," Ricardo continued, "is that there have been some complications regarding this new situation." Gustavo tensed, his hand tightening around his glass. "Lucia," Ricardo turned to her, his expression suddenly serious, "has been offered an incredible career opportunity, a prestigious research position that would take her around the world." Surprised glances were exchanged among the guests. "However," Ricardo went on, "this opportunity would separate her from little Miguel for extended periods, a difficult choice for any mother." Lucia's face flushed with anger as she realized what Ricardo was doing, painting her as a mother willing to abandon her child for career advancement. "That's not exactly," she began, but Ricardo smoothly talked over her. "Which is why," he announced grandly, "I've arranged a special solution. The Paralyzed Family Trust will establish a new marine research center right here with Lucia as its director. She can pursue her career without leaving Miguel. A perfect compromise, wouldn't you agree?" The guests broke into applause, clearly impressed by Ricardo's apparent generosity. Gustavo and Lucia exchanged bewildered glances across the table. This wasn't at all what they had expected. "A toast," Ricardo concluded, raising his glass, "to family solutions." After dinner, as the guests mingled with after-dinner drinks, Gustavo finally managed to pull Lucia aside. "What just happened?" he asked in a low voice. "I have no idea," Lucia admitted. "He mentioned the research job offer earlier, asking if I'd reconsidered. When I told him absolutely not, he just smiled and said he understood completely." "This doesn't make sense," Gustavo frowned. "Why offer you a prestigious position here? It contradicts everything he's tried to do so far." "Maybe he's really had a change of heart," Lucia suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "No," Gustavo shook his head. "There's something else going on." "Where's Miguel?" "With one of the servers," Lucia said. "She offered to walk him for a few minutes while he was fussing. She's just over—" She stopped, looking around with sudden alarm. "She was right there a moment ago." Gustavo scanned the deck, his heart racing. "I don't see her." They began moving through the crowd, searching for the server with their son. "Have you seen a server with our baby?" Lucia asked a board member's wife, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "I think she went below deck," the woman replied. "Said something about a diaper change." Gustavo and Lucia hurried to the stairs, descending rapidly to the lower level. Miguel! Lucia called out, her voice echoing in the corridor. No response. They checked their stateroom first. Empty. Then the nursery that had been set up in an adjacent cabin, also empty. Something's wrong, Gustavo said, pulling out his phone to call Maria. No signal. Damn it, we're too far from shore. A cold fear gripped Lucia. Ricardo, this was his plan all along. Create a distraction with that announcement while someone took Miguel. They raced back to the main deck, where the party continued, oblivious. To their panic, Ricardo was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Ferraz, a staff member, approached. Your brother asked me to give you this. He handed Gustavo a sealed envelope. With trembling fingers, Gustavo tore it open and read the brief note inside. Brother, meet me in the captain's quarters. Come alone if you want to see your son again. Our Gustavo showed the note to Lucia, whose face went pale. I'm coming with you, she insisted. The note says alone, Gustavo reminded her. I don't care what it says, he's my son. Gustavo hesitated, then nodded. Stay behind me. And if anything happens, your priority is Miguel. Understand? Lucia nodded grimly. They made their way to the bridge, the yacht's navigation lights casting eerie shadows across the deck. The door to the captain's quarters was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the darkness. Gustavo pushed it open slowly. Inside, Ricardo sat in the captain's chair, Miguel cradled in his arms. The baby was awake but calm, seemingly unaware of the tension in the room. I said, come alone, Ricardo observed coldly. Did you really expect a mother to stay behind while her child is in danger? Gustavo countered, positioning himself protectively in front of Lucia. Ricardo smiled thinly. Always the hero, brother. Even now. What is this about, Ricardo? Gustavo demanded. What could you possibly hope to achieve by taking Miguel? Leverage, Ricardo said simply. You've left me no choice. Leverage for what? Lucia asked, peering. Around Gustavo. A simple renegotiation of our father's will, Ricardo explained, standing carefully with Miguel. Gustavo gets everything. The controlling interest in the company, the family properties, the legacy, all because he was born first. That's not true, Gustavo argued. Father left you significant shares, properties. Crumbs, Ricardo spat. I've worked just as hard for this company. I deserve equal control. So this is your solution? Kidnapping. An innocent child? Ricardo looked down at Miguel. He's quite remarkable, isn't he? So calm even now, a true Ferraz. Give him back, Lucia pleaded, stepping forward. Eventually, Ricardo said, after Gustavo signed some papers transferring 50% of his controlling shares to me. And if I refuse? Gustavo asked, though he already knew the answer. Then Miguel and I will take a little trip, Ricardo said, his voice chillingly calm. A small boat is waiting on the far side of the yacht. By the time anyone notices we're gone, we'll be halfway to my private island, completely untraceable. You'd kidnap your own nephew? Lucia gasped. Only temporarily, Ricardo assured her. Just long enough for Gustavo to come to his senses. Gustavo's mind raced. Ricardo had clearly planned this thoroughly. A boat waiting, probably with trusted accomplices. An isolated destination. And with the yacht's communication systems undoubtedly disabled, they had no way to call for help. What about your big announcement? Lucia asked, trying to buy time. The research center? Ricardo laughed. A beautiful distraction, wasn't it? Everyone thinking I'd had some grand change of heart. It created the perfect opportunity to get Miguel alone. Those board members out there, Gustavo said slowly, what will they think when we all disappear? They won't notice for hours, Ricardo explained smugly. The yacht is anchored for the night. I've arranged for sleeping medication to be added to the after-dinner drinks. Everyone will wake tomorrow thinking you three simply left early in the tender boat. The full scope of Ricardo's plan became clear. He'd thought of everything, almost everything. A slight movement at the door caught Gustavo's eye. Maria, their undercover security, signaling to him silently. She'd found them. Gustavo needed to keep Ricardo talking, distracted. Let's say I agree, he said, taking a step closer. I sign over the shares, then what? Then you get your son back, Ricardo said. Everyone wins. Except you still lose, Gustavo pointed out. Even with equal shares, the board would never trust you after this. Kidnapping a child. That's prison, Ricardo. Who said anything about kidnapping? Ricardo smiled coldly. I'm simply spending time with my nephew. No one needs to know about our little negotiation. Gustavo took another step closer. You really think you can get away with this? That there won't be consequences? I've thought of everything, brother, Ricardo said confidently. I always do. Now, we're wasting time. The papers are over there. He nodded toward a folder on a side table. Sign them and this ends peacefully. Let me hold my son first, Gustavo demanded. Prove he's unharmed. Ricardo hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but no tricks. He started to hand Miguel to Gustavo. In sea. That moment, the yacht's horn blasted 3 times, the signal Maria had arranged with the real captain. The sudden noise startled Ricardo, causing him to momentarily loosen his grip on Miguel. Gustavo lunged forward, pulling Miguel safely from his brother's arms while shoving Ricardo backward. Lucia rushed forward to take Miguel, clutching him tightly. To her chest, Ricardo recovered quickly, his face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, he snarled, reaching into his jacket. Before he could withdraw whatever he was reaching for, Maria burst into the room, weapon drawn. Don't move, she ordered. Ricardo froze, his hand still inside his jacket. Security? He asked incredulously. On my cruise? My security, Gustavo corrected him. I knew you were planning something. The door burst open again as the yacht's captain and several crew members entered, alerted by Maria's signal. What's going on here? The captain demanded. Mr. Ricardo Ferraz attempted to kidnap this child, Maria explained professionally. I've witnessed and recorded the entire conversation. Ricardo's face drained of color. She's lying, he protested weakly. This is a family misunderstanding. We heard everything, the captain said grimly, including your admission about drugging the guests. Restrain him, Maria ordered the crew members, who quickly complied despite Ricardo's protests. You can't do this, he shouted as they secured his hands. I'm Ricardo Ferraz. I own this yacht. Actually, I own it, Gustavo corrected calmly. Just like I own controlling interest in the company, and as of this moment, you're relieved of your position on the board of Ferraz Shipping. You can't do that, Ricardo spat. Watch me, Gustavo said coldly. Captain, please radio the Coast Guard. Inform them we have a situation requiring their immediate assistance. As Ricardo was led away, still shouting threats and accusations, Gustavo turned to Lucia and Miguel. Are you both okay? Lucia nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. He didn't hurt him. Miguel's fine. Gustavo wrapped his arms around them both, holding them close. It's over, he murmured. You're safe now. Dawn broke over the ocean as the yacht returned to the marina, escorted by 2 Coast Guard vessels. The drowsy guests, who had indeed been mildly sedated through their drinks, were told that a family emergency had necessitated an early return. Ricardo had been taken into custody, facing charges of attempted kidnapping, drugging the guests without their knowledge, and various other crimes that Thomas Bennett, Gustavo's lawyer, was eagerly cataloguing. In their stateroom, Lucia packed their things while Gustavo made calls, ensuring that news of Ricardo's actions wouldn't reach the press before they were ready. What happens now? Lucia asked quietly as she folded Miguel's tiny sailor outfit. Legally. Ricardo will face consequences, Gustavo said, setting down his phone. I can't protect him from this, nor would I want to. And the company. The board will need reassurance, but with Martin Wells's support, I don't anticipate problems. Gustavo paused, watching her carefully. But that's not what you're really asking, is it? Lucia looked up, meeting his gaze. No, it isn't. Gustavo crossed the room to stand before her. You mean what happens with us, with you, me, and Miguel? Yes, she said simply. Gustavo took her hands in his. What do you want to happen, Lucia? The question caught her off guard. I want Miguel to have both his parents in his life. I want him to be safe and loved. And for yourself? Gustavo pressed gently. Lucia took a deep breath. I want to rebuild my career somehow. but not at the cost of being apart from Miguel. What if Ricardo's offer was real? Gustavo asked. Not the manipulative version he presented, but a genuine opportunity. A research center here, where you could work and still be with Miguel? You would do that? Lucia asked, surprised. I would. Do many things to keep you both in my life, Gustavo admitted. These past few days have shown me what truly matters, and it's not ships or contracts or board meetings. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. Gustavo, I'm not asking for an answer. Now, he assured her quickly. We've all been through too much, but I want you to know that I see a future for us, all three of us. If you're willing to consider it. Miguel chose that moment to wake, his happy gurgle drawing their attention. Someone agrees with me, Gustavo smiled, going to lift his son from the crib. Watching him with Miguel, so natural now when just days ago he'd been awkward and uncertain, Lucia felt something in her heart shift. The connection that had sparked between them at the gala, that had resulted in Miguel, hadn't been extinguished. If anything, it had grown stronger through their shared ordeal. Let's go home, she said softly. We can talk more there. The Ferrars. Mansion was quiet when they returned, most of the staff having been given the day off. Only Eleanor waited for them, rushing to embrace each of them in turn. Thank God you're all safe, she said fervently. When I got the message about Ricardo, it's over now, Gustavo assured her. He can't hurt any of us anymore. Carmen called, Elena told Lucia. I told her you'd call back when you were settled. Thank you, Lucia said gratefully. I'll do that now. As Lucia went to make her call, Gustavo handed Miguel to Elena. Would you mind watching him for a little while? I need to speak with Thomas about Ricardo's situation. Of course, Elena smiled, cooing at the baby. Come, little one, let's find you something to eat. In his study, Gustavo made the necessary calls, setting in motion the legal processes that would remove Ricardo from the company and ensure he faced justice for his actions. When he finished, he found himself staring at the family portrait on his desk, himself and Ricardo as boys with their stern-faced father between them. I never wanted it to come to this, he told the image of his brother. But you gave me no choice. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lucia stood in the doorway. May I come in? She asked hesitantly. Of course, Gustavo gestured to the chair across from his desk. Instead, Lucia walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. I've been thinking about your offer, the research center. And? Gustavo prompted gently. It's a generous offer, she acknowledged. But I don't want special treatment because I happen to be Miguel's mother. I want to earn my position, like I've earned everything else in my life. Gustavo nodded, understanding. What if I could arrange an introduction to legitimate research organizations? No strings, no special treatment, just an opportunity to present your qualifications. That would be fair, Lucia agreed, turning to face him. But there's something else we need to discuss. Miguel's living arrangements, Gustavo guessed. Yes. Lucia took a deep breath. He needs stability. One home, not shuttling between two places. I agree, Gustavo said, standing to join her by the window. Which is why I'd like to propose something. He took her hands in his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. Stay, he said simply. Both of you, not as guests, but as family. Lucia's eyes widened. Gustavo, are you asking? I'm asking for a chance, he clarified. A chance for us to see if what began that night at the gala, what continued when I found Miguel on the beach, could grow into something real, something lasting. We barely know each other, Lucia pointed out, though she didn't pull her hands away. We've faced a kidnapping attempt together. Gustavo smiled slightly. That's more than most couples go through in a lifetime. Despite herself, Lucia laughed. True, Gustavo grew serious again. I'm not proposing marriage, Lucia, not yet. I'm proposing we try, for Miguel's sake, and maybe for our own. Lucia looked into his eyes, seeing not the powerful billionaire or the ruthless businessman, but the man who had cradled his son with such tenderness, who had faced his own brother to protect them both. Okay, she said softly. We'll try. Gustavo's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his features. With gentle reverence, he leaned forward and kissed her. their first kiss since the night that had brought Miguel into existence. When they parted, Lucia's cheeks were flushed. "We should check on Miguel," she murmured. Hand in hand, they walked to the nursery where Elena was singing softly to the baby. "There you are," she said, looking up with a knowing smile. "Someone's been waiting for his parents." Together they approached the crib, looking down at the miracle that had changed all their lives. "He has your eyes," Lucia said softly, "and your smile," Gustavo replied, his arm around her waist. Miguel cooed up at them, reaching with his tiny hands. Without hesitation, they both reached back, their fingers connecting above their son. A family formed by chance, cemented by choice. 6 months later, the beach behind the Paralyzed mansion was transformed with white chairs, an arch draped in flowers, and rose petals scattered across a white runner. The intimate gathering of close friends and family members watched as Gustavo stood at the altar, Elena beside him straightening his tie one last time. "She's coming," Carmen announced, appearing at the top of the path that led down to the beach. The string quartet began to play, and all heads turned. Lucia appeared on the path, radiant in a simple white gown, her dark hair adorned with small white flowers. In her arms, Miguel, now 9 months old and dressed in a miniature tuxedo, babbled happily. Together, mother and son walked toward Gustavo, who couldn't take his eyes off them. The path ended exactly where, nearly a year ago, Gustavo had found a basket in the sand, a discovery that had changed everything. As Lucia reached him, Gustavo took Miguel in one arm and offered his other hand to her. "You're sure about this?" he asked softly, giving her one last chance to reconsider. Lucia's smile was radiant. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." The minister began the ceremony, his voice carrying across the beach where it all began. Where a desperate mother had left her child with a note, never imagining that it would lead not just to a father for her son, but to a love story that would heal wounds she didn't know she carried. "Today we celebrate not just the union of Gustavo and Lucia," the minister said, "but the official completion of a family that fate, and perhaps a bit of courage, brought together." Miguel reached out, grabbing the wedding rings that were tied to a small pillow held by Elena. Everyone laughed as Gustavo gently disentangled them. "Even now, he brings us together," Gustavo said, smiling at his son before turning back to Lucia. As they exchanged vows, the sun began to set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss the bride." Gustavo leaned forward, kissing Lucia tenderly while Miguel patted both their faces in delight. The small gathering erupted in applause as the new family turned to face them, a family created by a note in the sand, strengthened by adversity, and bound together by love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning. On a hill overlooking the beach, hidden by trees, a figure watched the celebration. Ricardo, released on bail pending trial, observed his brother's happiness with conflicting emotions. "Congratulations, brother," he whispered before turning away. Some battles couldn't be won. Some losses had to be accepted. As Ricardo disappeared, into the gathering darkness, Gustavo, Lucia, and Miguel moved toward their future, together as family bound by something stronger than any force that had tried to tear them apart. The note in the sand had been just the beginning of their story. The rest, they would write together. The end.